You are pricing tomatoes. Not buying them, pricing them. Turning the plastic clamshell over in your hand, checking if the $3.49 organic ones are worth it over the $2.19 regular ones, the way you've done every Sunday for 11 years. The fluorescent light over the produce section flickers once, the way it always does. Somewhere behind you, a kid is crying about cereal. You put the $2.19 tomatoes in the cart. You are worth $512 million. Nobody in this store knows that. Nobody in your life knows that. Not the cashier who calls you by name because you've come here every week since before she had her own kids. Not your neighbor, Denise, who waves at you most mornings while you load your Camry. The same Camry, 2016, 94,000 miles, a crack in the windshield you keep meaning to fix. Not your brother, not your ex-wife. Not one person on this earth outside of 2 attorneys and a private banker in Zurich who has never once seen your face. You put the tomatoes back and get the $2.19 ones. Old habit. You could buy the store. 14 years ago, you were making $34,000 a year writing back-end code for a payroll software company nobody remembers, in a building with a broken elevator and a parking lot that flooded every spring. You lived in a 1-bedroom above a laundromat that smelled permanently of dryer sheets and hot metal, and you told yourself the smell was comforting because deciding it was comforting cost nothing, and complaining about it cost energy you didn't have. You ate ramen you doctored with an egg and hot sauce because it felt like a decision instead of a limitation. You had $190 in checking on a good week. You had a maxed card you didn't look at the balance on because not looking felt, at the time, like a form of financial planning. You had a girlfriend, Amy, who left because, her words, said quietly, not even cruelly, you talk about spreadsheets like they're a personality. She wasn't wrong. You didn't have much else to talk about. You had numbers and the specific comfort of numbers that, unlike people, always did exactly what the math said they would. You didn't have a 5-year plan. 5-year plans are for people with enough slack to plan. You had a side project, a small, boring piece of infrastructure software, something that solved one annoying, unglamorous problem for e-commerce warehouses at 2 a.m. when you couldn't sleep anyway, and staring at a ceiling felt like a waste of insomnia. You built it because building it was quieter than being alone with your thoughts. You gave it away for free for 2 years on a forum under a username because charging for it felt like admitting you thought it was worth something, and you weren't ready to find out you were wrong. Then you weren't giving it away anymore. By year 2, 4 warehouses were running on it, and one of them, unprompted, wired you $6,000 and said essentially, don't stop. By year 4, it had 9 employees you'd hired over Zoom calls from your same 1-bedroom, and a client list that included companies you used to buy groceries from. Companies whose distribution centers were, without their knowledge, quietly held together by code you'd written at 2 a.m. in your underwear with a space heater pointed at your feet. Your coworker at the payroll tab, a guy named Marcus who sat 2 desks over and talked constantly about his fantasy football league, once asked what you did on the side. You said a little coding thing, and he nodded and went back to his lineup. And you remember feeling in that exact moment the first flicker of a thing you didn't have a name for yet, the specific, private pleasure of being underestimated on purpose. By year 7, a logistics conglomerate you'd never heard of before their lawyer called wanted the whole thing. Not the product exactly, the infrastructure underneath it, the part nobody sees, the part that just works, the part that becomes invisible the moment it stops failing. The number they offered made you laugh out loud, alone, in a Denny's parking lot at 11 p.m. because there was no one in your life at that point built to receive news that size. You called your mother. She asked if it was enough to fix your car. You said yes. She said good then. And you understood that was the whole conversation, and it was enough because she'd cleaned offices at night for 11 years so you could go to a decent school. And is it enough to fix your car was, in its own language, an act of love that didn't need translating into anything bigger. $650 million before tax. Before the 2 junior engineers who'd stayed with you from the beginning. A woman named Priya, who joined at U2 straight out of a coding boot camp with 2 months' rent left in her account. And a guy named Tom, who used to drive 40 minutes each way just to work in the same room as you because his apartment's Wi-Fi couldn't handle the deploys. You split a piece with both of them over their protests in a conference room neither of you could quite believe you were sitting in. Priya cried. Tom just kept saying, "No, seriously, no," until you'd already had the lawyer draw up the paperwork. You remembered exactly what $190 in checking felt like and never wanted to forget it on purpose. And giving that number away, even a slice of it, was the only spending decision in 14 years that has never once cost you a second of sleep. You said yes to the acquisition in 11 days. Here's the part nobody tells you about money like that. It doesn't feel like winning. It feels like standing at the edge of something and realizing the ground doesn't hold the same rules anymore, and neither, quietly, do you. You stopped sleeping well for the first time in your adult life, right after you got everything you thought would let you finally sleep. The discovery didn't happen in the lawyer's office. It happened 4 months later in this exact grocery store, standing in this exact aisle, when a man in front of you, mid-30s, expensive jacket, new watch, talking loudly into a Bluetooth earpiece about closing the Henderson deal, knocked a jar of pasta sauce off the shelf and didn't pick it up. Just kept walking, kept talking, let someone else deal with the mess he made because his time, his voice, his presence had become in his own mind too important for glass on the floor. You picked it up. You didn't think about it. You just did it. The way you'd always done it. The way you were raised to do it. And standing there with a stranger's shattered pasta sauce in your hands, sauce on your fingers, you understood something with total clarity for the first time in your life. You didn't want people to know what you had. You wanted to still be a person who picks the jar up off the floor. Not because you're better than him, because you knew in your bones that the moment people know the number, they stop seeing you and start seeing it. Every conversation gets a shadow behind it. Every friend becomes a maybe. Every ask, every favor, every "can I talk to you about something" becomes a transaction wearing a friendship's clothes. You'd read enough by then, late at night, compulsively, the way you'd once read about compound interest, about what happened to people who won lotteries, who sold companies, who inherited too much too fast. The calls that started coming, the family that found reasons to reconnect, the friendships that quietly recalibrated, almost politely, around what you could now do for them. So you built a second thing, quieter than the first. You built a wall. Here's what the wall actually looks like mechanically, if you want the proof instead of the feeling. The $650 million didn't land in an account with your name on it. It landed inside a structure. 3 trusts, a holding entity in Delaware, a smaller one in Wyoming, and yes, the private banker in Zurich, who has spoken to you exactly 4 times in 14 years and never once needed to know what you look like. Your name appears on none of the public filings. The company that bought your infrastructure now runs it under a brand you don't recognize when you see it in the wild, which is often because it's in the back end of half the apps on your own phone. It took an entire year to build the structure properly. Your attorney, the senior one, a woman who's handled exactly this kind of quiet unwinding for people you'll never know the names of, walked you through it slowly on purpose because she said most of her clients rush this part and regret it for a decade. Every asset you hold now sits at least 2 layers removed from your name. The house isn't in the trust that would show up in a basic search, it's in the second one, the one nested inside the first, the one that exists specifically so the first one has a reason to exist at all. Your accountant files nothing under your legal name that a curious neighbor with a laptop could ever stumble into. You asked her once if it was overkill. She said the whole point of a wall is that you build it before you need it, not after someone's already looking for the door. You still drive the Camry because a Camry draws no eyes, and a Camry that draws no eyes buys you 1,000 ordinary interactions a year where nobody wonders. You lease it, actually, not own it, a small deliberate inefficiency because a leased economy car is the single most invisible financial decision a wealthy person can make. You still live in the same three-bedroom you bought for $210,000 in 2015, worth maybe $340,000 now, in a neighborhood where the biggest financial event of the year is somebody getting a new roof. You still, once a month, walk into your old payroll software office as a paid consultant, 12 hours a month, $85 an hour, a job you don't need and have never once told them you don't need, because a W-2, however small, is one more piece of paper that makes an ordinary life look like an ordinary life. You clip coupons, not for the $4 you save, for the version of you that still clips them. Your accountant, the only person besides the Zurich banker and the two attorneys who has ever seen the full number in one place, told you once, half joking, that most of his ultra-wealthy clients eventually slip. They buy the watch. They mention the number at a dinner party after 2 glasses of wine just to watch someone's face change. They can't help it. The silence starts to feel like punishment instead of protection, and one night the punishment outweighs the plan. You told him you wouldn't. He said that's what they all say. You think about that conversation more than you'd like to admit, usually around midnight, usually with the lights off. There was one night, 2 years ago, when you almost did it. Priya, the engineer, the one who cried in that conference room, invited you to her wedding. You sat at a table near the back with people you didn't know, watching her dance with her father, and you thought about the piece of the sale you'd given her, the house she'd bought with it, the life it had quietly rerouted. Someone at your table asked what you did for work, and you said consulting, which was true, technically, the way a lot of your life is true, technically. And for one full second, watching Priya laugh under string lights she never would have had if you'd kept quiet 14 years ago, you wanted to tell the whole table everything, just to see if the truth felt as good as the secrecy did. You didn't. You went home and sat in your driveway for a long time, the way you do, and decided the wanting itself was answer enough. $512 million, and Tuesday nights you're standing at the kitchen counter cutting expired coupons out of a circular nobody else in your zip code still gets mailed. Because habit is armor, and armor is the whole plan. And a man who forgets his own armor even once is a man whose whole architecture starts to show. But here's what the number costs you, and this is the part that doesn't make it into anyone's fantasy of what this feels like. Not the house. Not the car, not even the work, which you still mostly enjoy, in the strange way you enjoy a hobby that used to be survival. The cost is the people. Your brother, Danny, still thinks you're doing fine. His word, said with a slight kind pity, the way you'd say it about someone who's stable but not exceptional. He offered to help you with a down payment on a real house 2 Christmases ago, sliding an envelope across the table with $4,000 in it, money you happen to know he doesn't have to spare. You let him think you couldn't afford your own upgrade. You said thanks, maybe next year. You watched his face do something soft and proud, like he was finally getting to be the successful one, and you let him have that because taking it away from him felt crueler than the lie ever could. Denise, your neighbor, invited you to a fundraiser 8 months ago for her daughter's school, a new science lab, target $40,000, struggling to hit it, a bake sale table with a thermometer poster tracking progress in red marker. You wrote a check for $500 and felt the specific private shame of watching someone thank you sincerely for an amount that is, to you, the cost of a good dinner, when you could have ended that fundraiser in the time it took to sign your name. You went home and sat in your own car in your own driveway for 11 minutes before going inside, engine off, hands on the wheel, doing math you didn't need a calculator for and hating every digit of it. And Amy, the one who left, the one who said you talked about spreadsheets like a personality, reached out 3 years ago. Congratulations, she'd heard you'd done well for yourself. Could she take you to coffee sometime? No agenda? You said you were busy. You have never once in 3 years let yourself find out what no agenda might have actually meant because you no longer trust your own ability to know the difference between someone who wants you and someone who wants what you have. And that specific kind of not trusting is the most expensive thing $500 million ever bought you. Not the guest house you never built, not the boat you'll never own, Not even the version of yourself who could have said yes to Amy's coffee and just found out. The silence. You lie awake some nights running a number that has stopped feeling real. And you think about the people who would look at your life, the Camry, the coupons, the 12 hours a month at a job you don't need, and pity you a little. Think you never made it. Think you're still just getting by. And some nights that thought is the most peaceful one you have, because being underestimated, at this scale, isn't an accident. It's the entire architecture. It's the thing you built more carefully than you ever built the software. There's a version of this story where you tell someone, where you sit Danny down and show him the number and watch his face rearrange itself in real time. Watch 11 years of, "How's it going, man?" recalibrate into something neither of you would know how to be normal about again. Where you write Denise's school a check that ends the fundraiser in one afternoon and spend the rest of your life wondering if she ever looks at you the same way. There's a version where you call Amy back and find out what "no agenda" meant, and either you get to know, finally, or you get to confirm the thing you've been protecting yourself from knowing. You think about all three versions more often than you'd admit. You've never chosen a single one of them. Some nights that feels like restraint. Some nights it feels like cowardice wearing a very expensive suit, and you genuinely can't tell which. And maybe that's the most honest thing about the entire arrangement. Here's the thing almost nobody says out loud about a secret this size. It doesn't get lighter with time. You'd think 14 years in it would start to feel normal, the way any lie eventually calluses over into something you barely notice carrying. It doesn't. If anything, it gets heavier, because the longer it goes unspoken, the more it would cost to finally say it. Not in money, in relationship. Every year you don't tell Danny is another year the eventual telling would detonate harder. You've done the math on that too, the way you've done the math on everything. There is no version of this where the silence gets cheaper, only quieter. You are back in the grocery store now. Same aisle, same flicker in the fluorescent light. The cashier who's known you 11 years rings up your $2.19 tomatoes and asks how your week's been. And you say, "Fine, same as always." And you mean it, in the strange, narrow way that word can be true when it's the only honest sentence you're allowed to say out loud. You have $512 million. Nobody here will ever know it, not because you're ashamed of it, because you've learned, the hard way, that the version of you people can see clearly, coupons, Camry, consulting gig, is the only version that's ever gotten to be loved for free. So here's the question, and it's the only one that matters. If you had the number tomorrow, the real one, the one that changes everything, would you tell anyone at all? Or would you already know, the way this man does, standing in a grocery aisle with the cheaper tomatoes in his hand, exactly what that silence is worth?